At the properties of a rectangle today. We'll go over the different properties first. Looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so properties of rectangles, and we're going to look at some examples, and then we'll let you kind of get to work. So properties of a rectangle. So just properties in general. I should have guided notes to kind of fill these in if you're in my class. If you're not in my class, well, get to do a little drawing today, I guess. So a rectangle is defined as a parallelogram. So it's a parallelogram. That's kind of key, that it's a parallelogram. So all of those properties that we talked about for parallelograms, opposite sides parallel, opposite sides congruent, consecutive angles supplementary, opposite angles congruent, diagonals bisect each other. All of those properties that we had for a parallelogram, those are going to hold as well. But now a rectangle is defined as a parallelogram with 4, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, 4 right angles. And so now it's going to have 4 right angles. So here's kind of our drawing of our rectangle. And you'll notice that in each of the corners, there's an indication of that little box. It indicates that it is a right angle, meaning we know the measure of that angle. And if it's a rectangle, the measure of that angle is then, of course, always going to be 90 degrees. And that's the measure of that full angle. And because, I kind of think about it, opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent, so that has to be 90 because it's an opposite angle. And then consecutive angles are supplementary. So these two angles and these two angles have to add up to 180. So that makes that one 90 and that one 90 degrees as well. So there's our first property. Those are going to be 90 degrees. A couple other, and these are just properties of parallelograms that are just adding in there. We're not really going to add much to this, but both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, and both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. And that's because it's a parallelogram. And you can see we've got the tick marks to show congruency on opposite pairs. And then both pairs are going to be parallel, so we could go ahead and put the triangles in here if you wanted to include the triangles in there as well. It's just properties of parallelograms, nothing that's really different. Kind of the same thing goes for the next one. If we look at the properties of the angles, both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. So this is 90, this is 90. They're congruent to each other. This one's 90, this one's 90. So it's a parallelogram, so that has to happen. Consecutive angles are supplementary. So consecutive angles would be here, and they have to add up to 180. And again, I kind of talked about that at the beginning of this. And then, again, just the property of the angles. It has 4 right angles, and we talked about that as in our definition of of what a rectangle is as opposed to a parallelogram. So the last thing we want to talk about is we're going to talk about the diagonals. And again, the diagonals in general, the diagonals bisect each other. So just like in every parallelogram, the diagonals bisect each other. But what's different about rectangles, and it separates it, is that the diagonals are congruent. So not only are these little parts congruent to each other, so each of the little pieces are now congruent to each other, not just the diagonals. So this whole thing, EH, is congruent to FI. And I think we'll go ahead and write that down in here. We're going to say that EH, that segment, is congruent to FI. So not only do the diagonals bisect each other, so break them into 2 congruent parts, but also the whole thing in a rectangle is congruent to each other as well. Now, why does it do that? If you kind of look at it, you kind of look at this. We have, these diagonals really form an isosceles triangle. So we've got this isosceles triangle right here. Notice that right there. And there's an isosceles triangle right there. Those two isosceles triangles are actually going to be congruent by side, angle, side, side, angle, side, side, angle, side. And then remember what that means then. That means that corresponding angles are congruent. So even within here now, we could take this drawing really one step further. And I'm going to go ahead and erase what I've got in here just quickly here, maybe if I can find an eraser. If I erase kind of all of this, we can kind of take this congruency one step further and say that this angle here is going to be congruent to this angle here, which is also going to be congruent to this angle here and this angle here. Because bases, an isosceles triangle, those base angles are congruent to each other. And then that also means then, by kind of rule, that if I look at this angle right here, that angle right there is going to be congruent to this angle right here. This angle here is going to be congruent to this angle there. So you've got a whole bunch of different things going on with these rectangles, and there's a lot of different things that we can have happen. Two big things. You've got the 4 right angles. That's new. And the other thing new is that the diagonals are congruent. And with those diagonals being congruent, it creates a lot of things we can do with these problems. So let's take a look at a first example. We're going to go ahead and do this top one first. And it looks confusing. We've got a lot of stuff going on. So we've got this rectangle, P, R, S, and T. And we want to find each angle if we're given that angle 1 is 50 degrees. Okay, so we talked about this before. I'm going to ignore all the questions. I'm going to go ahead and put where 50 is going to be. 50's got to go right there. That's what it tells us. Now I'm going to ignore everything, and I'm just going to talk about the properties that we talked about. Well, the first property that we can talk about is it says, well, this angle right here is a right angle. So because that's a right angle, and we know that angle 1 is 50 degrees, angle 2 is going to be 90 minus 50, or 40 degrees. Okay, so angle 2 has to be 40 degrees. Well, we talked about this is congruent to this, which is congruent to this. So we've got these isosceles triangles congruent to each other. So I've got, that's a base angle to an isosceles triangle. So that angle has to be the same as well. So angle 7 is also going to be 50. Well, then angle 6, I guess, has to be 40. Now I can find, really a bunch of things. We can look for angle 9. If you think about finding angle 9 now, angle 9, we've got this triangle sitting right here. Well, what's the sum of the interior angles of a triangle? The sum of the interior angles of a triangle is 180. So if I take 180 minus 50 minus 50, because that's 50 and that's 50, that's going to give me the measure of angle 9. So that's 180 minus 100, which is just 80 degrees. So the measure of angle 9 has to be 80 degrees. Okay. Well, then, I guess if we look at angle 10, angle 9 and 10, if you remember, are vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. So that has to be 80. Well, then, I guess angle 4 has to be 50, and angle down here, that has to be 50. Well, these two angles have to add up to be 90. Well, plus this is 40 over here. So that makes this 40, which makes angle 5 40. Well, remember 8, and now kind of what we got left. We got 8 in there, really. So if we look at these two, we've got 40 and 40. Well, we've got a triangle here. It has to add up to 180. So if I go 180 minus 40, that's 100. So that makes that one 100, and it makes that one 100. So just by knowing this one little thing over here, this is 50 degrees, we can use our different properties to find the rest of the sides. So now we can go ahead and answer our questions. Number 2, angle 2 is 40 degrees. Angle 3 is 40 degrees. Angle 4, I can find it through the mess. Where's angle 4 at? Angle 4 is 50 degrees. Angle 5 is 40 degrees. Angle 6 is 40 degrees. Angle 7 is 50 degrees. Angle 8 we said was 100 degrees. Angle 9 is 80 degrees. And angle 10 is 80 degrees. So just by knowing one thing, find things first. Don't try to find them in order. Sometimes that gets a little bit confusing. All right, so let's look at example number 10. PRST is a rectangle. Find the value of each variable. Well, if we look what we have opposite sides of a rectangle. Opposite sides of a rectangle are congruent. So that means that 7x has to equal 6x plus 4. Go ahead and subtract 6x from both sides. That gives you x minus 4 equals 4. Add 4 to both sides. X is equal to 8. And there's our solution. And we're done. Number 11. Oh, lots going on in 11. All right, let's think about what we have. We have a rectangle, and those are both angles down there. Okay. Well, so we got this right here. We know that's 90 because it's a rectangle. So if it's a rectangle, that means those two angles added together, 5x plus 8 plus 3x plus 2, those together have to add up to 90 degrees. Okay, well, we've got 5x and 3x, that's 8x. 2 and 8 is 10. That equals 90. Subtract 10 from both sides. We got 8x equals 80. Get x is equal to 10. So I've got my x value. So I've got x is equal to 10. So let's plug that in so we can find these measures. So that's 5 times 10 plus 8, and that's 3 times 10 plus 2. So this is 32 degrees, and that's 58 degrees. Okay, so now we have to find this one. Well, we've got this isosceles triangle right here. So this has to be 32, making this one 58, making this one 58, making that one 32. So 6y plus 2 has to equal 32. Subtract 2, divide, y is equal to 5. Gotta dance around a little bit, nothing wrong with that. Next one. Next one says RT. RT is that diagonal, and PS is that diagonal. The diagonals of a rectangle are congruent by definition, so if they're congruent, that means they equal each other. I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. That gives me 3 is equal to x minus 2. Add 2. X is equal to 5. And the last example for rectangles. We got diagonals. We've got this diagonal and that diagonal. So we know the diagonals are congruent to each other, but we also know that the diagonals bisect each other. So since the diagonals bisect each other, that means they're congruent. So these two measures equal each other. So add 4. 2x is equal to 40. X is equal to 20. And there are our solutions. So there's rectangles. Keep the properties of rectangles in mind. Remember, you got 4 right angles. Opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent. Both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Diagonals bisect each other. The diagonals are congruent. Have a great day.